I had heard the stories in Manaus before I ever set foot in a canoe. How the river holds its breath in the late afternoon, how the forest hushes like a cathedral before a storm, and how, if you're patient enough, the water itself will show you what the villagers simply call a velha, the old one, the one everybody talks about but almost no one sees twice. I told myself it was myth polished by evening rum, a tourist's legend that sells hammocks and river tours. Then I met Raimundo at the port hands like driftwood, eyes like wet stone, and he said nothing about legends. He only checked my life jacket, tapped the hull, and pointed us into a channel so green it looked like we were paddling through a leaf. By noon, the heat made tin out of the sky, and the air tasted like copper and rain. We let the outboard idle, threading through floating mats of water hyacinth, dragonflies stitching blue zippers over our wake. A cormorant surfaced with a fish, shook it once, and the forest made no commentary. That's what struck me most. The Amazon does not applaud itself. It doesn't need to. It just continues. The first scent reached us. It wasn't rot or fish. It was something like warm leather and river mud, a smell with its own gravity that pulled every thought into a single point. Pay attention. Raimundo raised one finger, the universal sign for shut up and live. He cut the motor. The canoe, unanchored and obedient, slid into a pocket of still water under a curtain of hanging lianas. The only sound left was the breath of the river, the tiny fizz of air escaping stems, the hush between leaf and leaf. Then the surface bulged the way a dream pushes against memory. A slow, heavy dome, green-brown and patterned with oval rosettes that seemed like closed eyes painted by a patient god. It did not break the water so much as rearrange it. I thought it was a submerged log moving with an insultingly steady purpose. It wasn't. The head came last. Not a dramatic hood or a sudden strike, just a broad shovel-nosed geometry rising until the waterline cut a perfect necklace around it. The eyes didn't shine, they absorbed. And the tongue. This is the part no one can explain, without sounding superstitious, touched the air with a soft double click like fingernails on glass. 1 to 2. It tapped the world. My ribs echoed the count. The snake didn't look at us, it tasted us. And I understood that seeing here is touch at a distance, a reading of temperature and presence written in damp letters on the wind. I expected speed. Movies taught me to. What came instead was calculus. The anaconda angled its body in the channel, using every curve of itself as a paddle, and what seemed like 8 feet of animal unspooled to become 10, then 12, then more, until the idea of measuring felt rude. The water carried the shape the way a page carries handwriting, loops smoothing into lines, lines into a long sentence I couldn't read yet. Raimundo didn't reach for a camera. He tapped the canoe once, reverence warning both. Something else moved, a spill of ripples against the far bank. A capybara levered itself from the water, too round for such grace, and paused with that open, foolish innocence prey is famous for after the fact. The snake did not charge. It corrected, a turn so stingy with motion it looked like a thought made visible. The tongue wrote 1 to 2 again. The forest drew back a fraction, which is to say, it held perfectly still. When the anaconda struck, it was not lightning, it was a door closing. Water folded. Sound narrowed to a grunt that died before it became story. The coils followed, not a crush exactly, but a refusal to allow breath. The river accepted the arithmetic without splash or jury. I have seen predators before. Wolves in Montana, a crocodile in Botswana. Each time the kill was a shout. This was a muffled yes. The snake's mouth found the geometry it needed, not by violence but by patience, aligning the capybara until the world and the hinge agreed. The jaw didn't dislocate, I know the biology now, it accommodated. Those little black commas of teeth held purchase, and the throat became a tunnel with its own gravity. Time lost its edges. A kingfisher's metallic note stitched the minutes. My heartbeat was a metronome refusing to slow. I remember thinking, stupidly, that the sheen of the scales looked like oiled bronze in a museum. Then the snake gave a single, incremental gulp, and the river's surface drew a quiet figure 8 around the act, like a signature. When it ended, nothing happened. No triumph, no music. The anaconda settled into the shallows beneath a mat of weeds, as if lying down were another word for disappearing. Only a gentle, obscene bulge betrayed a story inside a body. The tongue clicked once more. 1, 2, and the head slid under a curtain of roots where the water was tea-dark and cool. The hyacinths drifted back together, polite as ushers closing a door. Raimundo exhaled, as if someone had been holding his lungs for him. "Now you've seen it," he said softly. "I understood the shape of it. Now you have seen." We didn't follow. We backed the canoe with our hands, water soft against our wrists, until the current took us back into the bright, indifferent avenue of the river. The forest went on being infinitely busy. A troop of squirrel monkeys scolded something we couldn't see. The sun printed gold fingerprints on the black water. I realized the legend was never about size, not really. It was about the precision of an old intelligence, practiced to invisibility. It was about the way the Amazon edits any sentence that isn't necessary. That night, in a stilt house that smelled of smoke and rain, I lay in a hammock and watched a gecko argue with a moth on the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, the tongue wrote 1 to 2 on the air above my face. Not a threat, a fact. Tomorrow, the river would breathe the same way. The snake would wait beneath the green punctuation of hyacinths. People would say, "Avelha" in the plural, as if she were a myth that traveled. And somewhere down a side channel, a foreigner would arrive with a camera and a pocket full of disbelief. And the forest, impatient and generous, would teach him to count differently. Morning is not gentle out here. It arrives as a weight, the air already wet, birds arguing from every height at once, and the river pretending to be still while it carries entire conversations beneath its skin. Raimundo pushed us into a side channel where the water turned to polished coffee and the canopy closed like fingers over a secret. He taught me how to read edges, how hyacinths form tidy rafts after a passing body, how a sandspit wears faint commas where something hauled itself up at night, how a curtain of roots can look unremarkable and still be a door. We didn't hunt the snake. That's not how this works. We practice patience in the way the forest demands it quietly with no bargains. A king vulture spun a slow circle over a cleared patch upriver, and the heat stacked itself into columns you could almost lean on. Every so often, Raimundo would touch the water with his paddle, not to move us, but to listen. The sound told him depth, branch, bottom. He said very little, was to correct my city mistakes. "Don't grab the vine," he murmured. "Some vines grab back." He said it like he was telling me where to find the salt. By noon, we grounded in a flooded igapo, trees standing ankle-deep in black water, their reflections so perfect it felt like walking into a photograph. The trunks held scars where seasons had written their own heights, a ledger of wet and more wet. I noticed a series of pale shed skins draped over a branch the way someone might hang a towel, one small, one long and crinkled into sunlight. I reached. Raimundo caught my wrist. "Everything you touch tells on you," he said. He made me look at the ground instead, a soft suggestion of a path sliding from shadow to root to water, not a trail so much as a preference. He ate in the boat cool rice, salted fish, a wedge of lime that made the river smell briefly like a city street after rain. I asked him how many times he'd seen her. He shrugged. "Enough to know I haven't seen all of her." The humility in that line was a map I didn't yet know how to read. In Montana or Maine, I count miles and elevations. Here, the only numbers that matter are intervals and heartbeats. How long the forest holds its breath before something surfaces. How many 1 to 2 clicks the air carries before a choice is made. The afternoon turned metallic. Cicadas soared the heat into sheets. A sudden wind ran a finger down the channel, and the hyacinth mats parted as if scolded. I felt it before I understood it, the way the canoe seemed not to float, but to rest on something that was also resting. The river's breath changed, not louder, closer. A bulge lifted just enough to warp the reflection of a palm trunk. Then it resolved into pattern, that museum bronze of scales, the ovals nested like secrets, the anatomy of patience coming back into focus. It was a different animal than yesterday, smaller, younger, maybe, but the intelligence felt the same, a quiet accountant balancing a wet ledger. I had the camera in my lap. My thumb found the record button on reflex. I remembered last night's lesson and let it float there, unused. The snake moved as if the water had asked it to. A white-throated jacamar clicked from a branch, and the sound bounced off my ribs. The head lifted, wrote 1 to 2 into the dense heat, and turned toward a net of roots that gathered along the bank, a perfect, dark archive. In that moment, something else moved. a line of bubbles rising from beneath the roots, too regular for swamp gas. A coiled lung exhaling, a fish cut into silence. The anaconda paused, tasting the period at the end of the river's sentence. Then she slid under with the kind of grace that makes you feel clumsy just for having a skeleton. We waited. The mosquitoes practiced their trade on my knuckles. A distant thunderhead stacked itself over the far trees, bright on top, bruise below. And then the forest pressed a finger to its own lips. The root curtain trembled. Not a strike. An adjustment. The snake backed out, reversed as precisely as a boat with a seasoned hand on the stern line, and drifted cross-channel. Only when she was almost gone did I see what she left. A long, faint figure 8 inscribed on the surface, a double loop that folded itself closed as if no one had written it. Raimundo smiled without teeth. "He says, 'Not now,'" he said. He wasn't joking. Cloud broke, and rain came in coins, loud on the leaves, soft on the river. The world smelled new and very old at the same time. That's when I realized the legend people sell you at the docks is smaller than the one the river tells you for free. The snake is not a monster. She's a system temperature, current, edge, shadow, muscle. And when you finally see her, what you're seeing is not one animal, but the way this place arranges itself around patience. On the way back, we passed a tourist boat anchored to a tree. A man in a bright shirt leaning too far over the gunwale with a phone. I watched him try to pull the jungle through a lens, while the jungle quietly turned the page. He would leave with a story measured in pixels. I was leaving with a rhythm, 1-2, the small click that lived now behind my teeth. Back at the stilt house, the night came as a gentle ambush kerosene light, rain in the thatch, a gecko skittering like a typed line across the wall. When I closed my eyes, the river breathed in the hammock with me. The old one had said, "Not now," to us, and somehow that felt like permission to come back and ask better questions. By the third day, my senses had been retuned like a guitar left too long in a humid room. Edges mattered more than centers. The truth announced itself at the margins, where light failed, where water met root, where a raft of hyacinths carried a memory of something heavy that had passed before dawn. Raimundo said we would walk a terra firme trail for a while, let the river become sound instead of scenery. The forest on dry ground has a different grammar leaf litter speaking in crackles, ant highways written in black gloss, buttress roots like the ribs of a sleeping animal. We found a giant cast skin snagged on a fallen branch, a long, delicate ghost of anaconda scale parted neatly down the side. Up close, it looked like stained glass made by a patient reptile god. I held my breath without meaning to. It wasn't the size that undid me, it was the perfection of the leaving. A life sheds the exact shape of itself and moves on. How do you carry that lesson without turning it into a metaphor too small for it? Raimundo let me look. He didn't let me touch. "She knows where she left it," he said. "If you take it, you change a sentence she's still reading." At a small oxbow lake shaded like a closed eyelid, we sat and listened. The air was syrup-thick. Frogs practiced minimalism. Somewhere, a tinamou poured a melancholy note into the soup of noise. In the shallows, a procession of bubbles traced a slow curve. For a breath, I thought, gas. Then the curve straightened into intention, and a young anaconda, thin compared to the matriarchs, immense compared to my northern expectations, lifted its head the width of a hand. 1-2. The click landed on my tongue like a seed. She wasn't hunting. She was navigating the lacework of submerged branches, untying a knot only she could feel. People back home will ask for numbers. How long? How heavy? How close? I want to tell them the measurements that matter here are different. Distance from shade to sun, the temperature at which frog chorus lowers by a note, the interval between 1-2 and the decision to move. The snake drifted under a mat of duckweed, vanished without ceremony, and left behind only the slightest figure 8 wrinkle on the surface, a signature that erased itself as soon as it was written. I wrote it down anyway, knowing the paper would lie a little simply because it existed. We circled back to the river by a route Raimundo trusted, and I could not have found again with a compass and a week. The channel there narrowed to an intimate width, the banks close enough to trade rumors. A capuchin monkey scolded us for existing. The water, black as tea, carried the sky like a stolen thing, and at that precise hour when the day seems to reconsider being day, the forest's breath changed. Not silence, alignment. The hyacinths ahead parted along a seam too straight to be wind. Raimundo's paddle froze mid-air. The head that rose was old in a way that had nothing to do with years. It wore the patient geometry of a tool perfected by use. The eyes were not hunter's lanterns, they were instruments for reading. 1, 2. The count printed itself against my palate. She turned not toward the obvious our canoe, the open water, but toward a dark grammar of roots gathered into a vault. Somewhere in that archive, something made a tiny sound, like a dropped pin. The snake corrected her angle by the smallest possible measure, a decision so modest it felt like mercy. Then the water folded around her, and she was inside the sentence we couldn't read. Most stories would end with a strike and a lesson about power. This one gave me a different ending: restraint. We sat through it, not seeing what we most wanted, learning to be grateful that the Amazon does not narrate for us. The rain came on a wind that smelt of metal and mango leaves, and when it reached us, it wrote 1,000 brief phrases on the surface. The roots vibrated once, and the river sighed the way a house does when someone leaves a room. She didn't reappear. The only proof she'd been there was the rhythm behind my teeth and the fact that neither of us spoke for a long time. On the paddle back, lightning stitched white sutures in a charcoal sky. We navigated by things that did not move, dead snags, a bend like a bent elbow, a cluster of palms with their fronds pressed into a single hairdo by the wind. The village had already lit itself yellow window squares, radios arguing soccer, children darting like sparks under the stilts. I realized the legend I had arrived with had shrunken in the wash. What remained was bigger and quieter, an old intelligence that doesn't perform, a choreography of margins, a discipline of listening that makes you a smaller, better instrument. That night, with rain drumming the roof and a moth thudding like a tiny fist at the lantern glass, I practiced the count without meaning to. 1 to 2. Not a superstition now, but a tool, a way to measure patience, to mark the space between appetite and act. I thought of the shed skin, the perfect absence that still belonged to the body that left it, and of the figure 8 wakes that erase themselves as they declare themselves. In the morning, we'd take one more channel, Raimundo said, if the river lets us. He said it with no irony. Out here, permission is not metaphysical, it's hydrological. On our last morning, the sky wore the color of a sharpened spoon and the river felt taller, as if the night had raised it a notch while no one watched. Raimundo said we'd try a narrow chute he trusts only when the water is in a reasonable mood. If she says no, we go home, he added. And by she, he meant the river, not the snake, a distinction I realized I'd been sloppy about until then. We moved early. The village still yawned. Smoke lifted in thin threads from breakfast fires. The current gathered itself into a soft fist and dispensed us between banks close enough to press a palm to. It was not a place for motors or for bravado. Lianas wrote cursive across the channel. The light fell in green coins. Every sound wore moss. We drifted by intention more than by stroke, the paddle used like a finger on a library shelf. Twice Raimundo stopped us with a touch, once for a caiman, half sunk in the syllabus of roots, its eye recording footnotes, once for a patch of bubbles where the bottom exhaled. Each time we let the idea of forward sit and cool until it stopped boiling. I had the strange sensation that the canoe had acquired manners. There are moments here when the forest edits itself. A breeze will erase a sentence of insect noise, or a cloud will low the ceiling and every bird will recalibrate its key. That happened now, invisibly. The hyacinths ahead separated along a seam as straight as a ruler, and the Blackwater's surface pushed up in a slow, reluctant dome. Even expecting it, I felt the body answer first, the lungs counting before the mind. 1 to 2. The head rose. The eyes, that unspectacular and devastating instrument, tasted us from a polite distance. If yesterday's encounter had been about restraint, this one was about permission. She moved past without studying us, choosing a corridor we couldn't see. The sort of path that exists only for those who can read density and drift. For a long, indecorous minute, more of her kept arriving after curve, until the brain gave up on numbers and surrendered to claws and cadence. When the tale finally resolved, and the hyacinths drifted back like stagehands closing a curtain, the river appeared flatter, as if it had laid a heavy thought down and stepped away from it. We sat in the blank that followed. It wasn't disappointment. It was a stripped silence, a new kind of oxygen. I realized I had come here greedy for an ending, the photograph that would certify wonder so I could carry it through airport security. The river, patient and amused, had given me something unphotographable instead. A discipline for the senses, a revised arithmetic how long between 1 and 2, how slight a correction a body needs to make when it's entirely honest about water and weight. On the way back, we passed the same tourist boat I'd seen earlier in the week, now empty, its anchor line scolding a root. A heron balanced on the stern with the professional disdain of someone who works here full-time. In the village, a radio argued a goal that had happened 2 seconds ago. A boy chased a chicken in a halo of dust. The world did not lean toward my revelation. It had other errands. I found that comforting. Legends should not bend the day-to-day out of shape. They should tuck themselves under it, like the old intelligence under hyacinths. Packing my small bag felt like erasing a map I'd just learned to read. The hammock, still warm with the chemistry of my sleep, swung with the river's afterbreath. Raimundo watched me, kind as a door, saying little. I asked him the wrong question, finally. How do I see her again? He smiled. You don't see her, he said. You arrive correctly, and sometimes she allows. I wanted to write that down in a way that wouldn't embarrass me later. I failed and wrote it anyway. On the main channel, the current shouldered us toward the city, the way a big crowd tucks a child along without losing him. The water changed color by degrees, the forest loosening its grammar into warehouses and wakes. I kept tasting the little click at the back of my mouth, 1, 2, not as a souvenir, but as a tool I hoped I wouldn't misplace once the noise of the modern world climbed back over my ears. It counted small things on the way out. The gap between wake and shore, the pause before a boatman waved, the interval between my pulse and the rivers. At the port, Manaus was exact about its business. Rubber no longer rules it, but commerce still swings like a machete. I shook Raimundo's hand with the brief, sturdy gratitude men use when words would embarrass the thing itself. He nodded past me at the river, meaning, I think, take the lesson with you, not the story. The lesson is quieter. It survives dry seasons. On the plain, pressed against a window that could only pretend to be a frame for that unfenced world, I finally understood why they call her a Velha in the plural, as if she were more than one. She is the sum of patience, edges, temperature, shadow, breath, added up until the answer moves under hyacinths and writes 2 soft clicks on the air. 1, 2. The legend is real. Not because the snake is large, though she is, because the river allows her to be, and taught me for a few days, to be something smaller and better in return. And if anyone asks me for proof, I'll give them what I have left. The rhythm behind my teeth, the figure 8 awake writes and erases, the shape of a silence that took its time to teach me how not to fill it. The Amazon doesn't end her sentences with periods. She closes them with water.